be, I wanted to be absolutely certain that we could get as many in as possible. Good morning. I am so pleased that we have over 120 people that have registered for today's meeting today. We appreciate the fact that you are willing to take time out of a Saturday morning to participate in this very, very important consensus meeting. Beth, can I have you, just because it's distracting for me to try to admit people, can I have you take over that responsibility while we
Sure.
get started here?
Of course.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to share my screen now. Oops. So. Now,
You can see it.
Okay, great. Well, again, welcome. This is an election security consensus meeting today. As Mark has been sharing, please make introductions in the chat, if you would please, including your local league, so that we know who's here. We'll be discussing this morning why we need an election security position. And I think from some of the comments that we have already heard this morning, it's pretty evident that many of you are already very much aware about why we need this. After we've taken care of some of the housekeeping duties, we will have a Zoom test poll, which we'll give you a little bit of practice for those of you that maybe haven't had the opportunity to participate in a Zoom poll. It's very, very easy, and we'll walk you through the process. And then each of the consensus questions will be followed by a poll so that we can get membership input and participation as we move forward on this position. Oops. If you do have a question, we have people that will be monitoring the chat, and we would like for you to ask your questions in the chat. Just because we have such a large group, trying to keep track of hands and that kind of thing will be difficult. So please post your questions in the chat. For those of you that maybe haven't done that before, if you will scroll down, take your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, or for some of you, it may be at the top of your screen, you'll see logos, one of which will be, it looks like a little conversation bubble. It says chat. If you will click on that, a chat box will open up on the right-hand side of the screen, and then you'll have to scroll down to the very bottom, and it will allow you then to type in. As soon as you hit return, it's posted to chat. So it's quick and it's easy to do. And as I said, we have folks that will be monitoring that. I'd like to begin now by introducing the election security team. I, as Colorado State League president, participated. Tony Larson, who is the LWVCO League Director for Action and Advocacy and a former LWVUS board member.
Know where they're from.
He's a member of the Boulder League Voting Methods team and the State Legislative Action Committee. Maud Nerol, who is current or former League State Action member in not only Colorado, but also the states of Nevada and Oregon. Neil Mcburnett, who is a Boulder League member. He's a computer science and an election integrity consultant who, oops, technical difficulties here for me, who has been instrumental in Colorado's adoption of risk limiting audits. So you have a core team, including Gathia, Maud, and Neil, who have lots and lots of expertise in this area and have spent many, many, many hours researching, debating, and working on this. Beth Hendricks, who is our LWVCO Executive Director, is also here today, and she will be facilitating the Zoom polls and helping us with technical issues as well. So how did we get started to enable us to be where we are today? It came to our attention that the League of Women Voters of Colorado would be seeking national consensus on a position that they—
Of Oregon.
I'm sorry, you're right, Neil. It's right up there in front of me. League of Women Voters of Oregon will be seeking a national consensus on their position that covers 4 areas: personal information protection, cybersecurity, election security, and mis- and disinformation. They actually kind of came from a little different perspective than the Colorado group did, in that they began looking at this because they had one of their state league members that had their information, their personal information hacked, and it created substantial grief for that individual. And so that kind of raised their awareness. Not that we're not all aware that cybersecurity and personal information is a big issue anymore, but that's the perspective from which they got started. And oops. And it took them, there we go. It took them about 3 years to get their position drafted. Now, keep in mind that part of that was COVID related. While the Colorado team stands on Oregon's shoulders, and we are most appreciative that they brought this to the forefront, we stated very clearly that the only way we could support consensus would be if it were revised. There were some components that we have included in the Colorado position that we felt were extremely important and had not been included in Oregon's. And we also felt that, particularly given the temper of the times, that this really needed to be a standalone position. So what is, my apologies, I don't know whether it's the user or whether it's my computer that's giving me some problems with the slide deck here. So what is a league position statement? Well, first of all, it's broad statements. The whole purpose of a position is to have a document in place that has somewhat an extended shelf life. That doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be tweaked over time, but we don't want to draft a position that's going to have to be changed every year. It is a document that is designed for league members' use to serve as a yardstick or guideline, if you will, for advocacy and lobbying. It is something that new issues and legislation come up that league members can go back and refer to. So having a strong election security position is really important. We'd like to see it adopted at the national level because it would then provide leagues across the United States with the support that they need to lobby for voter legislation that reinforces our mission of empowering voters and defending democracy. So what was the process that we used? Though the time on task may seem short, this committee has a wealth of expertise in this area upon which to draw. And the current assault on voting makes what we are doing especially important right now. We are delighted that many of you participated in one or more of the 7 informational meetings that we held for league members across the state and asked great questions and provided important input. Member input today will provide this committee with additional insights, and we hope member supports so that we can fine tune the draft position into a position document that we can then bring back to membership for a vote. So the purpose of this meeting then is to discuss the election security consensus questions in detail, to get input, to provide you, our membership, with clarification. We would like for you to submit any questions that you have in chat. So if you're having issues with chat, include it. Well, in that case, you may just have to speak up, because if you can't get into chat, we won't know that you're having problems with it. But if you will click on the reactions that will allow you to raise your hand, then if you're having difficulties with the chat, that will allow us to give you a chance to speak up so we can help you with that. Then, as we move along in the process today, there will be individual Zoom polls for each consensus question. They will be displayed. You'll have time to read them, submit your response, and then as soon as we've gotten input from everybody, Beth will then post the results of each of those individual Zoom polls. And what this will do then is it will allow the committee, if we have your support at the end, to go back and make important edits to the position document that you as our membership believe are important. All of the comments that are made in chat will be saved, so that we will also have that as a document that will help us move forward. So what are the next steps? Well, if local leagues have consensus meetings, responses are due back to this committee no later than January the 30th at the end of the day. And that information, those responses or that input needs to be emailed to Laura Baker at info@lwvcolorado.org. Once we have gotten everybody's input, then the election security team will go back, edit the draft position based on that input, and then a special membership meeting will be set up. And we have that on the calendar right now for February the 7th at 6:30 p.m. You will need to register just like you have to for other league programming. And that should be a relatively short meeting in the sense that hopefully we've been able to tweak the document in a way that voting will be fairly straightforward. So mark your calendar, Monday, February the 7th, 6:30. If the
Karen,
yes.
Is it fair to say that the polls today are a practice vote?
They are a practice vote in the sense that they are designed to give the committee information that will help us be able to go back and make edits in our draft document that this group feels are important in order to strengthen it and make it acceptable to Colorado League membership. So the final vote will occur, and this is assuming that everybody agrees that this is a really important position that needs to be crafted, and we need to submit it to LWVUS for consideration at the 2022 convention. If we do adopt the final draft, then it will be, we have to submit it to national by March the 1st for consideration. And at that point, then this committee will go out, schedule presentations with other states, and we will solicit support from other states so that hopefully by the time we get to convention, we will have a pretty clear sense of whether this is going to pass at the national level or not.
All members are invited to the meeting on the 7th.
Yes, yes, they are, just like the meeting today. Just like the meeting today. And, you know, if for some reason something happens and you can't attend that February meeting, you know, we've gone back and forth and around. And our feeling has been, we tried, as I mentioned earlier, to have a number of informational meetings across the state prior to today's meeting. We felt that it was really important for everybody to be, figuratively speaking, in the same room at the same time, so that we can all hear one another's concerns, input, comments, suggestions. And we feel the same way about the meeting to take the final vote. To try to schedule several meetings, I think would, in some respects, be counterproductive. And so we've scheduled it for February the 7th. If you can't come, but you feel very strongly, then talk to someone in your local league and ask them to come and share. So we've got 2 test polls that we're going to do right now. And what will happen is that Beth will post the poll on your screen. And if you put your cursor on it, and I don't know whether you can see my cursor moving around, I can't see the test polls, but you guys will be able to, and you can move them around if you want to. We'll read through the first poll and it will be posted, and you have options of how you would want to vote on that. And as soon as you have clicked on the response that you want submitted, then you click on the submit button, and we'll give everybody a minute or so to do that once the poll opens. And then as soon as Beth gets responses, she'll say the poll closes in 30 seconds or whatever, so you have a final chance, and then she will report the results. So we're going to do that twice so that everybody hopefully will feel comfortable. And if you have questions, either as you're doing it or after the fact, again, please post those in chat so that we can address those. So
Anybody having trouble with the test Zoom poll?
Well, we haven't started it yet.
Yeah, we have.
We
It's
have.
up.
Has it started? Okay.
Yeah, you're the only lucky person who can't see it.
Okay.
Almost 90 people have replied so far, so it's looking good. Okay, 5 more seconds.
Thank you, Marilyn, for giving your co-pilot's vote in the chat. We appreciate that.
Okay. Here's our results. I'm surprised that a few of you have never told someone that you're on mute.
You lucky you.
That's awesome. Great. Okay. So
Number 2.
Before we go to number 2, I think there were a few late arrivals, and I wanted to remind people to please introduce yourself in chat. The chat will be the record of who is here that we will save after the meeting.
And please put your name and also your local league. It's wonderful to see how much participation we're getting from really all over Colorado. That's the upside of Zoom.
And this is also a good time to practice if you want to try moving the poll around. We will have more interesting text on the main screen that we're sharing. And so if you're on a computer, you should be able to see both of those. If you're on a phone or a tablet, you might not be able to, but play around with the poll, see what your options are.
Does anyone need help getting to chat?
And speak up, because if you can't get to chat, we won't know you're having problems.
Right, and thank you folks for introducing yourselves, because that's how we're going to be taking questions, is in the chat. It's wonderful that we've got 107 people on. Wow. But it's very hard for us to see raised hands with that many people.
All right, are we ready to finish up with the second poll?
And here's our results. Almost unanimous. With just one outlier saying just here to hear folks say you're on mute, and I bet I know who that was.
Well, that adds a little levity to the conversation.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we successfully got through. Oops. Well, we successfully got through the first important step. Now, if I can get my computer to get me to the right next slide. All right. So as we, oh my heavens. So as we have said repeatedly, please put your questions in chat. There will be consensus questions for each component, again, of the position, and for each consensus question that we provided you with earlier on. There may be some tweaking in language on those questions. And after each poll is taken, then Beth will share the results of that with you so that you all can see what the input was. And then that information will be compiled so that the committee will be able to work with it moving forward. So at this point, I am going to quit sharing my screen so that Maud can begin sharing hers.
Can you see my screen? Okay. So there are a number of things that are needed for secure elections. And those of you who came to one or more of our informational meetings know what these terms are and have seen them, or those of you who've had a chance to read through our documents. And we'll have slides and a little bit of talk, and then questions on all of these sections.
So I think the first thing we want to emphasize is that Colorado really is a leader in elections. And we have an excellent system that's based on paper ballots and the ability to do risk limiting audits. And so part of what is in our position statement is already covered by our state's procedures, but we just want to be sure that we protect that going forward. And we would like to make this a persuasive argument at the national level that other states would do well to emulate some of our procedures. And of course, there's always room for improvement. And one of the examples to point out is Georgia. And they also have voter verifiable paper ballots and audits. And that was a crucial component of the 2020 election aftermath, having that ability to check that. So the first consensus question is on voter verifiable paper ballots. And again, what that means is that voters can verify that as they submit their ballot, that they have in fact marked their ballot the way they wish to have their votes registered. And then because we have paper ballots, those can be used later to verify vote totals in audits. So again, things to remember are we have links to the document at the top of the chat, and there's links to the documents on the main page of you can reach from a link on the main page of the League of Women Voters of Colorado website. So if you have questions on this, we would like you to enter those into chat, and Karen Sheik will be monitoring that. And so this first question then is going to deal with voter verified paper ballots, and Beth will be putting up a poll but first, do we have any questions? Okay, so somebody is correcting what I had to say about Georgia. That's excellent. So again, if you look at the material in our position statement. That would be something that I think could be pointed to. Yes, the League of Women Voters does have a position just on paper ballots. And we feel, as we'll get to in further points, and Peggy Leach was at the last one of the educational seminars where we discussed legislation before the state, which was enacted, which now allows very limited online voting. But this particular question is about paper ballots, and that does factor into it. How important is it to have paper? You could have assisted devices, as we have at polling places. So if you have a feeling on that this is the time to register a comment in the chat.
So our next question does not say there can't be any assistive devices. It just talks about, so here is the question, and it doesn't say anything about, no, we don't want assistive devices. It just says, are paper ballots important? Voter verified ballots like paper, so they can be used in audits.
And if you want, we have documents where we were corresponding back and forth with Oregon, and many of the Oregon members have been very cooperative with us, and we've worked together with them. I can provide that to, if somebody sends an email to me, gaithia@gmail.com. I am happy to provide the details of what they had. The main bullet point that I remember was they had voter verifiable paper ballots without actually specifying what that meant.
A couple of things in chat, Gaithia. One question or one comment was if it would be possible to let membership know where this committee has enhanced.
Right, that's what I was trying to answer.
Okay, sorry.
And I can't do a line for line comparison now, but our document is available on our website. Their document is available on their website, and we have correspondence back and forth that I'd be happy to share.
Yeah, Susan, if you want, I'm in the Denver membership book also. If you, and I'm Maud LWV at Gmail. If you want the document that compares us and Oregon, just shoot Gaithia or me an email and we'll send it to you. And then Barb Winery asked about if the feds took voting machines, and is that legal, and can we still get to a vote? And when we get to software independence, which we will shortly, but not yet, we will talk about that because
Right. And on Deb Statler's next question about her concerns about non-paper based ballots, actually, if you wait until we get to consensus question number 13, I think that's actually one of the things we're asking you to express your opinion on today. So I think, well, there's 3 more messages I have to read here.
And
Yes.
a former Ohio voter had paper backup ballots, which were printed by the voting machine. And they're suggesting that there's a need to be specific on paper ballots.
Yeah, I think we try to use the term of art voter verified paper ballot to mean, and this is well understood in the world, although various states try to confuse it, but we're making a statement for league members to support or comment on legislation. And we hope that league members will understand that a voter verifiable paper ballot is in fact a ballot where the voter can see how they voted. They look at their piece of paper. It's not something that somebody prints from a fax machine at the other side of the planet or whatever, and that they can verify their vote and then see that it gets cast. So we can't get into all of the details of how different states do different twists on this. We rely on local leagues to know how to best advocate for this in their situation. But, and it is very important that we alert voters to the need to verify their ballots, because as we saw in Georgia and in other places, sometimes they aren't encouraged to make sure that what the machine printed out, if they use the machine, is actually how they voted. So, but that's the term of art, and I think that's the level of detail that we can get into in a position, along with all the educational material that we have that tries to make that much clearer.
Right. And to Barbara Dungy's question on the use of paper ballots, this position calls for paper ballots with risk limiting audits. And it's essential to do a risk limiting audit that you have an actual record of the vote. And at the moment, and for the foreseeable future, the only way of doing that is a paper ballot. So yes, that would be something that this position statement would allow advocacy to say you have to be able to use the paper ballots for audits.
Just quickly to address Celeste Laundrie's comments. LWVOR in their position includes lots and lots of information about a variety of different topics. And what Colorado is wanting to do is to have a separate standalone election security position for a couple reasons. Number one, it may have a better chance of getting adopted at national if it's just one smaller part. And secondly, it needs to be a bit more detailed and a bit more robust than what we felt Oregon's position was. So what Colorado did was address in greater depth some of the things that Oregon did not include.
And Christina, you are advocating for hand-marked paper ballots, but Neil will correct me, but I believe there are people who need assistive devices, and so they cannot mark their ballot by hand, but their assistive device can mark it for them, and we do not want to exclude that. Neil, am I right?
That's right, but I think that the comment is important. We do want to. We probably want to encourage hand-marked paper ballots being provided to everyone who can use them, because they are. It's much more likely that a voter looked at their paper while they were marking it than that they actually look at what a machine prints out for them. So it's required by law to provide accessible machines that are accessible voting options, which we do typically via ballot marking devices, but those are tricky. But again, these are issues that I don't think, send comments for clarifications or to the position would really be helpful. And this is exactly the kind of discussion that we're looking for, sharp eyes. And I see people out there that have good experience with this. Thank you.
So yes, we are going to vote on this question. We wanted to make sure we had all the discussion before we voted. I know there are a couple of people who were doubled up in front of a computer, and rather than you're welcome to give the other person's vote in chat, but also Neil has tested, and it is possible to log in to this meeting on a phone, I know we have at least one tablet here. And so if your co-pilot would like to log in on their phone,
I'd only get one vote though, I'm not sure. I forget how it works. You can give it a shot.
Yeah.
I think this is something we can worry more in detail when we're doing an actual vote. This is really advisory. I mean, so we do want a sense of people here today. It's not like you are voting any given position down. You're giving us a chance to come back and correct things that you think are important that we take into consideration.
Whoops.
Okay, we need to go back to voter
The discussion-
plug in the poll.
So are we ready for the poll?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And Barbara, thank you for pointing out that you might need to, well, anyways, people who are doubled up, our household members are welcome to try logging in on their phones. Or put the answer, that other person's vote, in the chat. Oh, good, lots of responses.
Ten more seconds. Thanks, Frank. Okay, I'm closing the poll. What a shock.
Beth, could you, because I cannot see the results of the poll. Can you read the results of the poll?
I'm sorry, Karen, it was unanimous. 100% of people voted yes, this is important.
Thank you.
Good, thank you all. Like any other computer, election systems can go sprung. And occasionally what comes out is not what voters intended. It can go sprung for a lot of reasons. And risk limiting audits are an efficient way to recount enough ballots to ensure that if there was some error in the election system, it wasn't big enough to change the outcome. Efficient in the sense that we don't count more votes than we need to get to that certainty, that level of certainty. Or we count a lot if we need to count a lot, but that varies depending on, among other things, how close the election is. Deb asks, are these audits hand counts? And I believe they are. Of Neil, they're hand counts of paper ballots. Yes?
Absolutely. Any risk limiting audit by definition has to involve a human being looking at a voter verifiable piece of paper and assessing what the voter intent was.
It has been wonderful to have an election integrity consultant, not somebody that we can call up occasionally, but somebody who's been absolutely down in the weeds and in the thick of this. Having his expertise has just been fabulous. Ann Sutton asks, so we'll get to 2A in just a second. She asks if it would be correct to call this which is 2A. We'll get to 2A, and we'll get to your question in just a sec when I have 2A up on the screen. The qualifier in the question, such as paper, seems to imply that other non-paper options can be used.
So this is absolutely one of the very final questions we'll ask. So we're going to come back to that.
And so all risk limiting audits require paper ballots. That's a question for Neil. Neil, you need to come off mute.
Risk limiting audits require paper ballots. That is correct.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I love all the thinking and talking that's and chat that's going on here. Is anybody having trouble getting to the chat? Fantastic. Okay. So here is the question for 2A. And the question on 2A was, would this be correct to call this a compliance audit? Neil, that's yours.
A risk limiting audit is not so much a compliance audit as there's another term for it in the financial world where it's like a materiality audit or something like that. A compliance audit would typically mean, did you follow the procedures? Do you have a written procedure that says there should be 2 election judges from different parties? yes, you did that, and so on. It's a different thing than actually looking at the evidence, looking at receipts, counting up receipts in a financial world. And there's a different term for that. As I understand it, I'm not a professional, like, non-election auditor.
Right, and there are in our study materials references to the specifics, technical specifics of how to conduct risk limiting audits, and you could refer to that. By Philip Stark.
And Patty in Denver asks, how are audits performed in states with no paper ballots?
I mean, you can do all kinds of audits. I actually recommend auditing whatever you can anytime you can. But you couldn't do a risk limiting audit if you didn't have voter verifiable paper ballots. And to the extent, I mean, actually, in some cases you have some of them. And from a formal standpoint, you would actually assume that any ballot that was not voter verifiable, for instance, a ballot that came in over the internet, was a vote for all of the losers in a way that actually makes it clear that, you know, if there were only 3 of them statewide, it probably doesn't matter in a given election. If there were 10% of them statewide, then you're going to have trouble verifying any election. I mean, you're not going to be able to verify an election with less than a margin of 10%, if that makes sense.
And Neil, can you answer Ann's question briefly on specifications for statistical significance? I think we are just relying on going from the general position statement for individual leagues in the future to advocate based on just the definitions of risk limiting audits. Do what Neil helped set up our state's risk limiting audits. What do you think should be specified, if anything?
I think the use of the term, I mean, again, we are not writing laws. We don't have to go into the level of detail that, you know, a vendor would try to sneak out from underneath. We're trying to have an understandable position for a regular league member to alert them that they should be looking for definitions of risk limiting audits and trying to figure out if somebody in their state is trying to do something that doesn't make sense. But the way a risk limiting audit is defined is just strictly that there is a statistical procedure that allows you to get the specified level of confidence, to limit the risk to a certain percent. And I don't think we want to go deeply into that, but our materials point to the original papers on the topic, and we just want to make sure that league members know to use terms and know to tell their legislators, you know, hey, this is defined and the law should handle our state and our situation and make it abundantly clear.
Right, league positions, and as you know, by being an legislative action team member, committee member, are broad rather than narrow. And there are good definitions of risk limiting audits out there. Peggy Leach says, if there's another type of audit becomes available, we aren't tied to just risk limiting audits.
I want to follow up again on Ann's point. I mean, thank you, Ann. You're absolutely right that significance is the sort of thing that people write PhD theses on every year. And thankfully, the inventor of risk limiting audits is the Dean of Statistics at the University of California, Berkeley, and he knows this stuff. So that's where I go for information on that. And as the field evolves, I hope that's where the league continues to help members go to get that info. I'm sorry, let me look at this other question.
So Jan's question on risk paper ballots, that there may be other methods in the future.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The answer to that is yes. And so we did not want to keep the league in its rock solid, it has to be a paper ballot position, although we also want to make it really, really clear that cybersecurity experts do say that for the foreseeable future, they see no alternative to paper ballots on the horizon. So that's the wording balancing act is trying to leave things open without actually opening the door. or something like that.
Absolutely. And we do advocate for other kinds of audits besides risk limiting audits. We want to audit voter registration databases and compliance audits and reconciliation audits. And there are also elections where we might not want to mandate a risk limiting audit of every contest. In most states, that would essentially require a recount of a whole lot of contests. They may or may not want to do that. I would love it if we had hand recounts of everything, but that's a pretty big burden. And so what we've said is we want some risk limiting audits and we want audits of every contest, but not necessarily the in-depth style that a risk limiting audit would require.
Or at least that's what we're recommending too.
We're advocating for it, and it's somewhat aspirational, and every state league and the national league will need to advocate. There's a lot of moving of the needle in a lot of these states on these things, and we're just trying to enable people to realize what the forward direction is.
And Jan Mormon is yes. Risk limiting audits require paper ballots because currently there's no other way to verify how a person voted. Yeah, that's exactly the everything out there electronic can be hacked. And you know, in the very, very, very far future, there may be some light at the end of the tunnel, but there's not good light. There's not light at the end of the tunnel now. And Jane Hamburger asked about ranked choice voting. That's a different thing from, that's how we vote. That's not the security of our vote. So that's outside our scope. Yes.
Well, we're not going to talk about voting methods here, although it's one of my favorite topics. But it is important to know that some voting methods, some forms of ranked choice voting, for example, and in particular, many kinds of voting methods that we love in the league that are proportionally representative, also don't have, we don't have feasible ways of doing a risk limiting audit for those without doing a hand count of all the ballots. So the research on how to do audits and on how to give the electorate confidence in the results continues. And so we want to call for audits. We want to recommend some risk limiting audits. I mean, this is, again, our sense of it, and no one is an expert in all of this. And so we value your input.
And I'd also point out that at the last national convention, we did pass an alternative voting methods position statement, and that is now part of the League of Women Voters of United States impact on issues document.
And Linda Thomas is pointing to the documentary Kill Chain: Cyber War Against American Elections. Thank you, Linda, for bringing that one up. And she points out that Kill Chain documentary says you cannot audit without a paper ballot trail. Do we have other?
Yeah, I
Yes.
think Lisa is right. We should call for the vote.
I think we've gotten everyone's questions and comments. Thank you. Good thoughts. Yes, we do have a long ways to go. Can we have the poll, please, Beth? 2B. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Keith.
Ten seconds. Okay, I'm closing the poll. The results are unanimous for both 2A and B.
Thank you, Beth. Gathia.
Okay, so the next question is on voter registration databases. Now, I think this is something that in general, the league has had years of expertise dealing with, and I would hope that we would all agree that having databases that are accurate, updated, and can be independently audited, have transparency so that individuals can verify their own records, and that all of that, I'm hoping, is an open shut case with the league. And the only crucial part of the information here that go in our position statement that is different about electronic databases has to do with protections against cyber attacks, programming areas, and such. I would hope, well, I'll see what comes up in the chat, but I'm sort of hoping that this one we can rapidly move to the poll.
Questions or comments on voter registration databases? I'm seeing a deafening silence. Discussion, questions? Are poll books limited to counties? Neil?
I'm not positive what the question is.
Are poll
No,
books limited to counties?
Yeah, I mean, generally there will be a statewide voter registration database, and each county will run its own election and in terms of eligibility. And so there will be either a paper poll book, or in Colorado, we use an electronic poll book that allows anyone to vote in any location of the county as a convenience, rather than having to go to a particular polling place.
Our Secretary of State's office has those records.
So here's 3A, the first question. Can there be both paper and digital? Is another good question. I think the counties can use paper as a backup. Yes, Neil?
In emergencies, I think this has varied. There are times that the statewide system went down for a period of time, and they essentially took provisional ballots. Again, the details of how this is done varies widely with how states do things. There's a state that doesn't have a voter registration database at all. North Dakota basically says, if you're in our system, essentially as a citizen, I don't know the details, but they don't have you don't have to register to vote. You already have credentials that allow you to vote. So we don't want to get too far into the weeds in the position. And there are ways, we believe, to make both paper and electronic options work. It doesn't have nearly the same dangers that we're going to cover in a minute in terms of voting.
So our draft position, our draft position does not say electronic versus paper. It just says databases that are accurate, regularly updated, can be independently audited, and have transparency so individuals can verify their own records. And we're leaving it up to county election officials and local leagues to work out the details. And Susan Stark, we talk about contingencies and backups, I think later in our slide, later this morning. And Linda Thomas, the same thing. We talk about contingency planning. So yes, our draft does talk about contingency planning, that there needs to be that. So our first, thank you, Deb. Our first question is about being accurate. The second is about being audited. The third is about being updated. The fourth is about transparency, individuals being able to get to their own records. Any other questions or comments? Or can we go to our poll? Beth, Ruthie, we were hoping to be done by noon. I don't know if we will be. I'm hoping.
I'm
Beth,
glad
could we
she's
have,
got it set aside till 1, but the rate we're going, we'll have to see. But it's such a
Beth?
good discussion.
Yeah, these are great questions. Beth, if you could put up the poll, that would be, oh, it is up. Fantastic. It is up and people are voting.
And notice you have to scroll down.
Yes, you have to scroll down in the poll to get to all of the questions.
There are 4.
Yes. Did I take 3 by accident? You should have done it.
No, I've been doing it. What are you talking about?
Oh, okay. Okay. I was just talking about the
So just be
questions.
ready to do 4.
Yes.
Okay, 5 seconds until I close the poll. Again, the results are unanimous. 100%.
Yes, all the way.
Yes.
Oh, sorry that our registration confirmation said it was only going to be an hour. Apologies. So we have unanimous results. Thank you, everyone, for participating. This is fabulous. So we've talked about the vagaries of election software, that the equipment can go wrong if the software is buggy or some malicious actor from this country or another country has gotten in and rewritten pieces. Software independence means we still can tell how people voted without having to use that software that was just turned upside down by something or someone's. And currently the only way we can do that is risk limiting audits and voter verifiable paper ballots. We already touched on some of these. Do we have questions on software independence? So here's the question text, which is a little long. And if anyone's not able to see it, let us know. I'm just going to let you folks read and questions and discussion if anyone has it. No questions? I'm shocked. I think we're ready for the poll. Oh, still reading. Sorry. Well,
You should be able to move the poll box over if you click on it, so you can see the words behind it. Just kind of move it off to a corner.
so Jan says, I'm not sure how a voting system would be software independent. It's not that there's not software on the machines. Neil really had to educate Kathy and me and Karen on what this means. It means that if the software goes wrong, we still can figure out how voters vote. And that's by using the paper.
Right. The fact that voters verified their votes on their pieces of paper and you have that paper in a warehouse means that even if like all software stopped working, you could go to the warehouse and you could do a hand count and you could find out who won. So in that particular approach, which is the one that we use because it's the only one that's currently really available, that's why it is software independent. The software could be hacked and you could still get the right answer. And as we will discuss later, there are some esoteric but hopeful computer science research going on how to do that without the use of paper. But it's not ready for prime time, as you will see soon.
Yeah, definitely not ready for prime time.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll.
Yes.
We are again unanimous.
Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Okay, so the next question relates to the position statement on chain of custody. And this again is something that the league has spent probably most of the last 100 years working on to have safe and secure elections. So that we need, and it's also super relevant to Colorado right now, that we need strict protocols, accountability, control of key systems, passwords, and original ballots limited to select designated personnel with appropriate expertise and designated responsibility, and strict documentation of time and place of access. And that we need to have qualified and trained election officials and workers and volunteers who are unrelated to candidates and with no history of fraud or election offense. So I think, again, hopefully this is not a matter of argument.
Any questions on chain of custody or comments? Here's the first question. Is it important the chain of custody be secure, strict protocols, accountability? Celeste, this is relevant to every county clerk. Fortunately, most county clerks, if not all, almost all county clerks are aware of this issue already. Barb Dungy, does Colorado law prevent me from putting a box in place marked official drop box to create confusion as to where return ballots are and undermine the chain of custody was done in California in 2020?
I don't know the status of Colorado law, but that is absolutely one of the amazingly, it's frustrating we have to deal with all this sort of stuff, but that is a security issue that did happen, and it's something to keep in mind as part of the chain of custody. Thank you.
And
you guys are
that's
great.
it's a great question, and it's a chain of custody issue. So I think that as long as we have a good thing on chain of custody, that we have enough to stand on to talk about, no, people, there should be a law, if there isn't already, against people impersonating official drop boxes. Is there another aspect in the proposal to protect machines themselves from visitors with an agenda? And yes, it's this question: access to key systems, the original ballots, appropriate expertise, be limited.
And yes, if we elect a crook as our Colorado Secretary of State, we're in deep trouble. There are things we need to advocate for. There are certainly ways of undermining democracy. These are the principles that we want to operate on.
So are we ready for the question? Any more questions? Wait, store ballots from small counties earlier, wait. Secretary of State had a private contractor electronically collect and store ballots from small counties earlier in the 2000s. This was a potential man-in-the-middle attack vector. Do we know if the small counties are still being handled by consultants?
I don't know.
This is a good question, but I think what we're voting on now are the general principles, and certainly we need to get into the weeds and make sure that we look at everything closely and make sure those principles are upheld. That's what the league does.
Yeah, no, these are great questions. And I hope that election officials in Colorado and other states review our chat history if we make it public.
Right. And again, a secure chain of command would cover these, of custody rather, covers these. And Ruthie, we each numbered question, like all the questions for 5 will go up at once. But I think we are ready to do the poll. And Beth, there it is. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Frank.
10 seconds. Okay, I'm closing the poll. Once again, we are unanimous.
Thank you, everyone. So this is about securing passwords and ballots and equipment. The actual passwords for the equipment, the original custody of the original ballots, the actual equipment that gets used, the actual software that gets used as by the election officials. And the first question in this section is it important that these things be kept secure? Deb asks, good question, how is this different from 5? So 5 is chain of custody. If you think of the ballot as it travels from the drop box to the election places, it's more about the ballots themselves, I think. And this is talking about, this is in some ways broader. It's the passwords, the equipment. Chain of command is, if we document chain of command, it's who is it who picks up the ballots? Is it a team where 2 people are of 2 people and they're from different parties? Then what happens to the ballots and who's watching them as they get in? And this is more of in some ways broader. Any other questions or thoughts on this one? Here's the second half. Secure control of election officials. I don't think there's a C on this one, no. Is there a storage cost, and does there need to be state funding to handle the costs for counties? County officials are storing these. I think the law is 25 months from the election. And so they are already doing this. Diane asks if all the counties in Colorado use the same voting equipment. I think most of them use one brand, but not all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are 2 brands in use. There's one county that uses Clear Ballot, and there are a couple of counties that just hand count things. I think that's still the case. They're very small. They just don't need to spend money on equipment.
This one is not about getting the results to the Secretary of State, except to the extent that the software and the equipment used may be used to get the results to the Secretary of State. But we do talk about contingency planning in a little bit. Are we ready for the poll? Any other questions?
I think Jed's raising a good point about trust. We need a trustworthy democratic system, and we need to elect election officials we can trust, and we need the transparency to be able to see what is going on, and in cases when that isn't going on, that we have to have ways that are accessible. And yes, obviously democracy can fail.
So Beth, if you could put the poll up, please. And Karen, did you still have a question on 6A?
No,
Okay, thanks.
I have been kicked out of the meeting twice now. I'm sorry.
Oh,
And I'm trying to come back in and I'm looking at number 6 right now, and I will vote in it. So sorry.
Sharon, thank you for being persistent. We appreciate that.
Yes.
That's a great quality in so many league members.
Yeah, these computers and Zoom are my problem. Thank you. I'm voting now.
And it exactly makes the point that one of the points we're trying to make today, which is that computers are not infallible. Thank you, Marilyn and Frank, for voting in the chat.
All right, I voted yes.
Yes.
Five seconds. I'm closing the poll. Again, we are unanimous.
Thank you, Beth. Kathia.
Okay, again, some of these are statements that mesh with one another, that we want to have election equipment that is supported, tested, and secure. And one of the things that we would be interested in is allowance of upgrading of equipment, that you can have set standards for what's called interoperability, which means that a county clerk would be able to substitute or upgrade with a different vendor's equipment without problems of compatibility. And that would increase competition and decrease costs. There are, these things do get outdated, and there are better equipment that comes on the market. We want to be able to do that as good as possible, as well as possible. And that's also part of being able to monitor that it is tested and secure.
One sec, Kathia. Kathy Smith says she isn't getting the polls coming up for her anymore. I don't see anyone else saying they've got that issue. So Kathy, I'd suggest you log out and log back in and see if that fixes it. Again, computers are not infallible. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is just a mechanism of increasing competition, which is good for improvement, and decreasing costs, which is important for taxpayers.
Christina says if you mix and match vendors, you may have problems with maintenance and the errors that will result from this problem.
I
Neil?
think,
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're looking for is standards so that new entrants to the market can come in. It obviously, it's not like we're telling voting officials they have to buy mixed systems, but they do it already when it makes sense to them. And it's certainly possible for independent third-party vendors to come in and integrate systems from different vendors. So I see it as a flexibility that helps improve quality, to have interoperability and
yeah, and it also means that if your vendor isn't giving you good service, but you've already invested millions of dollars in the equipment, you aren't just stuck with it.
Exactly.
So, and Anne asks if there's a good reference for background on this question. Neil,
We
yeah.
have materials in our pretty extensive background study materials, but I can certainly provide more if anybody has questions, and I'd love to get your input.
Yeah, and if you look through the study material and you still have more questions, get a question to one of us, and we'll get it. So this is the first question for 7.
It's in the more section and at the bottom of the consensus questions. It's not a bullet point. The interoperability part.
And then this is about the standards. And that is, so are any other questions? Are we ready to vote? Beth? It's up.
Five seconds. I'm closing the poll. Once again, we're unanimous.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, everyone. So we've talked a little bit already about needing contingency plans. And we've in this meeting seen that computers can go sprung, software can go sprung. Deb, thank you for your comment on 7A. We will save this chat and everything in the chat will be used as input, as well as the polls in looking at revising the draft position. So elections systems can go sprung for various reasons. All of us have had our internet go down, our power go out. I don't have to, there's nothing we can say to our members in Boulder County, except that our heart breaks for the fire. But we've also in the state seen floods and mudslides and blizzards. And oh, by the way, we have a pandemic, which reduces often the number of people who can show up and work. And so part of our draft position talks about the need for contingency plans. I mean, we had contingency, Beth and I worked out contingency plans for what happens if the polling doesn't work in this meeting. Here is the first part. Is it important to have cybersecurity contingency plans? And the second part of the question is just about disaster recovery contingency plans from electrons and from disasters. Any questions or comments on contingencies planning? Wow. Beth, I think we are ready for the poll.
Five seconds. I'm closing the poll.
Okay, and if we have any comments about people who think that this position needs improvement or needs to be eliminated, or there have any other comments they wish to make, really would appreciate that being in the chat line. And you could also email something into the league.
But the chat is going to be the best record we have, and the polls on this meeting.
We did get one no vote on 2B, or excuse me, 8B.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was what I was talking about. Just make sure that we can get a sense of where it is you feel we were wrong. That's important.
Right. Yes. If somebody whoever voted no on 2B would put either something in the chat or something in an email on why they think that's not important, we would appreciate hearing that.
Okay, and so now going on to number 9, having to do with election oversight.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, let me get back on this track here. So all of us are familiar with a lot of these processes in old-fashioned paper at your precinct elections. The important concept here is evidence-based elections, that the election should be structured to provide convincing evidence that the reported outcomes actually reflect how people voted. So that we should have a system which in the old days when we had poll watchers, we had teams of judges, the public should be welcome to watch the election process, access copies of election equipment, source codes, samples of election equipment, and copies of ballots with personal identification information removed, and copies of procedures, but of course not passwords and other authentication secrets that have to be kept secure. And then the public should have a mechanism for addressing flaws in the election process. And all of that needs to be sure to happen without interfering in an ongoing election. Does anybody
So
have comments on
here's
that?
the first question about auditors and the public watching the election process and access copies, samples, not the actual stuff that's used. Oh, access source codes. Neil, we should have probably just said software.
So in recent years, we've had increased focus on the problems of having black boxes kind of running our civic life. We have opposition to algorithms determining who gets parole, or proprietary software that does things. And so there is a general goal in security to make things transparent so that everybody can see what's going on. This does not prevent a vendor from disclosing their source code from just disclosing it and still keeping it copyrighted and unavailable for anyone else to use. But we also have examples of open source software available for election officials to run their elections. And San Francisco has proposals out to acquire systems like that. And vendors actually can't guarantee that their software will remain secret. I mean, first of all, they have access to it, and we don't necessarily trust the vendors. Vendors have lost access to their code, as we've seen not only in Colorado and Michigan, but Diebold a decade ago. So the general notion is to make sure that the good guys can see the software and identify any security issues, knowing that a lot of the bad guys have access to it anyway. So we see it as an aspirational goal to get to a point where people are able to actually see the black boxes, open them up, and really have more transparency around how the actual source code, the actual engineering, the blueprints, as you were, work. Is that? Are there other questions beyond that?
And then the second question on 9 is, should the public have a mechanism for addressing flaws in the election process without getting in the way of the actual ongoing election? Any other questions on 9? I think this is the last, yes. Any other questions on 9? Beth?
10 seconds. Okay, I'm closing the poll.
Linda, I'm sorry you had poll problem. I think Kathy was able to fix hers by getting out and coming back in. So if you have problems on the next one, feel free, or obviously you can vote in the chat, but our last one is a little complicated.
We do have one no vote on 9A.
So again, if the person who voted no on 9A could put something in the chat or email to us about their no vote, we would greatly appreciate that input. And 9B was unanimous. 9B, any such mechanism needs to be clearly defined, as in clearly defined in the
I would assume by the state or maybe even federally, if we could get around federal mandates problems. So-
for how to address flaws. Yeah, or I mean, or at the local level. It's again, these positions are broad statements, and then local and state leagues use them to work with their local or state officials.
Sure.
And 9A, because I needed an unsure vote. Oh, okay, thank you. If software can be verified, then it can be treated like a black box. Neil and Jan, I'm not sure if I understand the question. Maybe Neil does.
It is already the case that the labs that test voting systems have access to the code, but we've seen that they don't do a very good job. There was a whole lawsuit in Colorado 15 years ago that said the certification process was evidently deeply flawed. They've improved it since then. That's part of why we adopted audits. But it's still my sense that actual access to the actual disclosure of the actual source code is very helpful for public accountability, transparency, etc.
And
And we want to be sure that the public is confident that the counting process isn't pointless, even though it is true that risk limiting audits would reveal whether or not there was a problem and that a full recount could be done if absolutely necessary. But we still would want equipment that's working as well as possible to avoid those sorts of situations.
so, and Barbara, you're right. Disingenuous public members. So acting to disrupt, right? That's why, I mean, I know I was a election election judge in Arapahoe, and we had a sheriff's officer on site, and false accusations. Well, we've already got those. So unfortunately, I think I hope that more transparency helps people have more confidence. That is,
And having the provision that they may not disrupt ongoing elections is crucial.
I just want to clarify open source software versus disclosure of software. We are not advocating for a legal requirement that software for voting always be entirely open source. I think there are fiscal reasons for wanting that, but that's not what the league is talking about here. We're talking about disclosure of the code so that people can inspect it. And you can disclose code while keeping it copyrighted. If everyone has to disclose their code, then it's going to be obvious if somebody is reusing somebody else's code. So I think it's the disclosure side that we're focused on here.
And Kathy, your question is, how would members of the public whose intention is disrupting an election be treated? Again, that's getting into the weeds of, are we going to have a sheriff's office there? Are we going to have a private security guard? Are we going to have zip ties and duct tape? I think
Do you
that's
have
more.
people monitoring from behind glass walls? That happens.
Yeah, I think those are weeds that the league does not get into. And Barbara asks, isn't Colorado's machine code reviewed by NIST?
So NIST approves voting testing companies, and the testing companies get access to the code. But again, as we've seen, they don't do a very thorough review. They've missed things in the past. So the goal in the security community is generally to allow independent researchers to uncover problems. And the problems can be beyond just things that we can detect with, let's say, a risk limiting audit. I mean, in my mind, the audit is more important than verifying the software, significantly more important, because we want to check that the paper comes out right. But if the software leaks how voters vote, you know, if there's privacy issues in it, if there's accessibility problems that you would only detect that way, it's just very helpful to have independent review of the code.
And as we've mentioned before, electronic voting over the internet is not ready for prime time. Resilient voting systems use paper ballots. Yes, assistive devices are good for those who need it, and that paper ballots should be verified by the voter before they're cast. Comments, questions, suggestions?
Launching the poll.
Good, thank you, Beth.
Five seconds.
Again, if someone has voted no, if you could put your comments in the chat, that would be wonderful.
I'm closing the poll. Again, we had one person vote no, otherwise unanimous.
And Gaithia.
Okay, so this question is on voter privacy, that it's important that who voters cast their ballots for remain secret, and that voters are protected from coercion. And if this isn't one where we've got some interesting feedback and sort of we should have thought of this first, on the actual wording of the draft position statement, which I strongly think we will need to change, but let's get your feedback on that. So originally we were very concerned about reports of unofficial door-to-door canvassing of Colorado voters after the election by people who were essentially demanding that voters tell them who they voted for so that they could do what they called an audit and see that perhaps the election had been stolen. And the Secretary of State issued a statement saying that voters, reminding voters that they're not required to tell canvassers how they voted. And all of that's very important. We don't want those sorts of practices to be widespread, but in wording the question, what we said was something, we said protection of the draft position statement number 11 is protecting the privacy of individual voters' choices, including against intimidating post-election door-to-door canvassing and protection against coercion. I don't think we can put the part in there because it's qualitative as to what people find intimidating about anybody at their door at all, except for Girl Scout cookies. And I think that the person who raised the question at one of our earlier education sessions was pointing out that exit polling is huge and very popular with the media, even though at a different meeting, the Weld County clerk told us how ridiculously inaccurate it all was because people lie. But that's beside the point. The point is, of course, you can ask people how they voted. They don't have to answer. But I think I'd be interested in your input as to how best to position the statement that we want privacy of the individual voter, we want protection against coercion, and you can, and that comments on that would be appreciated.
So and we actually did pull we did pull in response to one of the comments in our informational meeting. We did pull the original question 11B from the questions, and we probably will just talk about privacy. We anticipate just talking about securing voter privacy, which can be used in cases of it's a position that can be stretched to talk about overt coercion by league members. And Rona, on the previous one, you said you voted no on 10 because voters verifying their ballots are accurate before submitting would slow down the voting process. But remember, when we mark our paper ballots at home, we look at them. I hope we all look at them and make sure that we put the mark next to the vote, the candidate we meant to. That's what's meant by voter verified paper ballots. And that does not slow down the election process because we look at them before we put them in the envelope and then put those in the drop box.
Right. The remaining part of the process is under the chain of custody provisions. What happens after you get your ballot into the envelope? It's differentiated from a machine where what you think you punched in might not be what behind the other side of the box the machine is recording. And you can't verify that.
So Deb, you are right. The voter should be the only person who has the ability to reveal their vote, and that's why we talk about privacy or secrecy of
Right. So that I
voters'
think
ballot.
she's saying we need to see how we do the wording. I think that might be
Yeah.
a way to phrase things.
Yeah. So thank you. So I think we're ready for I should put up the question, shouldn't I? Sorry, people.
That's 12.
No, that's 12. Yes. So the question on 11, should privacy of voter choices be protected? And Beth, we're ready for the poll.
Five seconds. I'm closing the poll.
Marilyn, there's only one question now on 11.
Yeah, but they're
So-
putting the verbal part here. That's a good comment.
Yeah, but that is a good, that is helpful.
We were embarrassed and didn't put up the second part of the question once we decided that we were wrong.
yeah, we realized that the second part was not something that we, even among our team, could easily define. So we said, no, we're not going to do that. Okay. Again, anything over the internet can be hacked. Returning our own ballots once we've marked them over the internet. If only 3 people do it, only a very few people do this. Even if it's hacked, it's not going to change the result of an election. So it's not really a good big target for someone who is for a bad actor. But if a sizable chunk of the electorate or everybody returns their ballots over the internet, oh boy, someone in this country, this county, this state, another country can hack those ballots, can change those ballots and change the outcome of elections. And there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There's an arms race between the hackers and the cybersecurity experts, the white hats and the black hats. And there's no finish line, and there's no visible future where this is a safe thing to do. And Linda says that she read that people in Mexico can vote via email or fax. Email is through the internet.
Yeah, but we consider both email and fax to be forms of internet voting, and that's exactly what the last question is about, because it does get a little trickier.
Yes, question 13 is, we'll talk about that. And yes, some machines will give you a printout. Unfortunately, there have been machines, may still be machines in use that do not give a printout. Did we get all the questions?
And then 13 will be the last question, but it's sort of a multi-stage one.
Yes. So the question on 12 is, oh, sorry, there's more on 12. And there's no way to recover from votes that are hacked. And as I said, the more people who vote online, the bigger, the fatter the target for hackers, because they say, oh, that's a third of the voters. I can change the outcome of this election, no problem. So the question on 12 is it important that less secure voting methods such as online ballot return be limited to those who physically cannot use voter verifiable paper ballots?
I think Linda's raising an important question, and I hope that most of you were able to attend one of our presentations last week. As I stated earlier, the League of Women Voters of the United States' current position is paper ballots only. The mission of the League is to both empower voters and defend democracy. There is a lot of detail in our study about how it is that the crucial differences between financial transactions, where the person who sends the information and the person who receives it are known to each other and can be verified, or in financial transactions, either the commercial interests can absorb the cost or file criminal charges, restitutions can be made. There's no going back on a hacked election. And what we are proposing is limited use by only those disabled people or people overseas that absolutely could not vote any other way, because we want people to vote to be able to use these systems, and that reduces the threat of malware simply because it reduces the propensity for it to be an election affecting attempt.
So Susan Stark has a good question, so does Joan, and there's some more down in the chat. Susan, the MOVE Act, Federal MOVE Act requires that overseas and US military voters be mailed an absentee ballot at least 45 days before the election, or they can request that a blank ballot be sent to them electronically, basically over the internet. But there is no requirement in federal law that they be allowed to return the ballot once it's marked. If I get a blank ballot over the internet, I can pull up my county elections website and see, yes, what I downloaded from the internet is the same as my county clerk has on her website. And so this blank ballot is accurate. But once I send a marked ballot over the internet, there's nothing to say that some bad actor doesn't get hold of the markings on my ballot and change them, or otherwise change my
I think it's
vote.
important to realize that in
It's important to realize
this fall, the National Defense
fall,
Authorization Act contains some provisions that would have provided funding for expanding the use of online by military and overseas voters, UOCAVA voters, and that with strong lobbying effect from a major cybersecurity experts in the country was eventually withdrawn from the bill because they saw it as a cybersecurity threat and also a military security threat. And so there is real growing concern that even at the level that it was being used in the military, that it's a problem. And I have that specific was after the study was written. I have some documentation and links and more information on that. And if anybody emails me, I'd be happy to send that to them. But it is a security issue.
And Joan says, I understand the landline is needed for fax. Neil?
I answered that in the chat, but
Oh,
fax
okay. Thank
actually
you.
uses internet. In fact, landlines also use internet these days. The internet is kind of how communications move around almost entirely.
Thank you. There's a question about no online voting at this time. We actually get to that in 13. So if on 12 you think that there should be no internet voting, I would advise voting yes. And then in 13, you will definitely have a chance to say, no, I never want any voting, any ballot return over the internet. And what else do we have? Anne asks, is there software like 2-device verification on e-signature? Neil? Did you?
I'm sorry.
Ann Sutton's question.
I mean, there is a whole host of software that tries to allow signatures and protect privacy. And that's kind of part of all the various ways people try to do these quote unquote secure internet ballots, but it's not foolproof, not failure proof. So security experts say you just can't secure internet voting, and we agree that you can't absolutely do that. You can't also.
Very important to realize it's linked to the idea that the ballot is secret. So once your ballot goes into the ballot box, regardless of what the chain of custody is in between that and when it is counted, and there's no way to say that the piece of paper at the other end came from any given voter. So it's different than if you sign a contract to buy a house and you want to verify the signature and that goes through. There's an accountability of the person at the other end knows who they think they're talking to. Okay. And if that turns out to have been corrupted, actions can be taken, but there's no way to know that with any given ballot. It's a difference. That's the key difference between financial transactions or legal transactions and election voting.
Linda asks, how does one verify the ones asking to vote online are actually disabled? Again, that's more of the weeds than a broad league position.
But the Colorado law basically just asks them to attest to that.
Deb asks, she's concerned they may not be adequate efforts to develop non-internet voting methods for the disabled. My understanding is that there currently are quite a bit of options for non-internet voting for disabled voters. Neil, do you want to weigh in?
The law for 15 years has been that people need accessible ways to vote in polling places, and we've had that for quite a long time. Obviously, with the advent of COVID fears and more things moving online, the question always comes up, can't we make this easier? And again, that's part of question 13.
Right. And Deb, your second question is also part of question 13. So I think we are ready for question 12. And Beth has it up. And again, if you have a no vote, if you could put your comment in the chat, that would be exceptionally helpful to us, please.
I'm sorry. I mean, it's actually true that the question of whether there's adequate coverage for disabled voters now is part of 12. And so moving in that direction. And it relates to the part of question 13 that says the risks of making it more wide open are considerable. So they kind of tie together. I'm sorry, I'm perhaps not being as lucid as I could about this one.
And Peggy has a question that I apologize, Peggy, we missed. Will our position on internet voting allow for flexibility in the future in case a secure method is developed in 20 years? I would say 20 years is about 10 lifetimes in the computer world. And Neil, take it from here.
Well, the way that we developed it is intended to allow some flexibility. It is a position that is more permissive of internet voting, in other words, allowing a little bit of it, than a lot of organizations would like. There are still a lot of organizations that are very clear, just say no, and that's absolutely, people are very worried about a slippery slope if we allow any amount of internet voting. On the other hand, we're very interested in providing accessibility, and anytime that an individual actually is disenfranchised because they didn't end up with a way that worked for them to vote, that's a security problem too, in some sense. The question, and I think really the open question is it possible to actually limit it to only a small enough number of people that it doesn't have a big enough security, too big a security impact? And that's why we're asking you these questions, and they're great questions that you're asking us in return.
Yes, thank you. So Beth, are you ready to close the poll, or you did?
Already did.
Already did.
Yep, it
And
was.
thank you to the one no voter for explaining your vote in the chat. That is immensely helpful to us. So 13, we saved our most complicated question for last, because we wanted you to be all warmed up and have thought through all the parts that we'll go through in 13. And it's a trade-off between accessibility. There's a trade-off between accessibility and security. Obviously, if we all voted over the internet, it would be, as well as other ways, it would be very accessible, and it would be very secure. It would be very convenient. And then there are equities questions as well. So Gaithia, do you want to walk through this or you want me to?
Well, so what we have is a series of questions, and then each of the examples have 5 voting systems where we add more options as we go down the list. And after we get through these trade-offs, you'll be asked to vote. And so I just think we can just sort of march through these series of slides. I think people are demonstrating they're incredibly well informed.
Yeah.
So the first choice would be that we only allow in-person accessible private voting, and that we disallow mail-in ballots to all voters, very limited internet ballot return. I mean, we wouldn't have any ballot return, and that then obviously you wouldn't have a situation where all voters can return ballots over the internet. And then in here, we didn't cover this end-to-end verifiable voting that's in our documentation. And all I wanted to say is there are ways of making the internet a little bit more secure than it would be otherwise. We want people, if they do use the internet at all, which is not part of A, but later choices in the scenarios, to be using it in the most secure way possible. But that still doesn't mean we think it's secure enough. That cybersecurity experts think it's secure enough, and what we're asking you for is what you think is secure enough. And essentially it gets back to this idea that the League's mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. And how do you best accomplish that? So that's what we're trying to get at with these series of questions. So A would be that you would only have polling places.
With accessibility. And of course, the Federal Move Act would be
In fact,
we're not trying to overturn the Federal Move Act, but no returning ballots over the internet.
or by mail. In this
Yeah.
case. So B adds mail to the yes position.
So uniform mailing ballots to all voters the way we do in Colorado. But again, no return of ballots over the internet.
And C would be essentially what the current scenario is in Colorado, where we do allow some very limited internet ballot return.
And how the way the poll is going to work on this is different. It's not yes, no. We're going to have, each of these 5 methods will be a sub question, and the questions will be, I think the wording is not acceptable, maybe acceptable, definitely acceptable. And so we can talk a little bit once the poll goes up.
And we should mention that the way the questions are phrased has been refined a little bit from what you had beforehand, just to try to make it more clear what your approach is.
And the 4th method is in-person accessible private voting and mailing ballots to all voters, and very limited return of ballots over the internet, and adding that extra security for the ballots that are returned of end-to-end verifiable E2E VIV. And so, Anne, yes, we did change our wording a little bit because actually one of the state staff pointed out that this is a little confusing, so we changed it. But no wholesale return of ballots over the internet. And then the 5th is anyone can return their ballots over the internet. We use E2EVIV. We mail ballots to all voters. And we also have in-person voting. Questions?
So I think Nancy's question somewhat pertains to this one because it would affect how anybody voted on what scenario. In talking and negotiating with the advocates and representatives of disabled communities in the past legislative session, when the bill was passed that was amended to only allow limited voting to those with specific disabilities that were affected by not being able to use the paper ballot. It was really clear that that community felt that they needed a method that made them not have to put themselves in public or reliant on another person, and that felt different to them than what might be a more hypothetical risk of somebody out of their sight seeing their ballot. It's a complicated question, but that's sort of my sense of that they felt that was a different situation.
So Celeste, we're not getting into the mechanism of how mail ballots are returned. So it's not included in 13. I think 13 will be, Ruth, you're right. It's a little confusing. 13 is a little confusing. Thank you, Neil. Drop boxes are part of vote by mail. And I think it will actually be a little clearer once the poll goes up, but are there any other questions?
But we can't put all parts of all possible scenarios here, but if you have something that you think should be more conditional, like mail ballots to only voters who requested ballots, for example, is something that's done in some states, put it in the chat, please.
I think we're ready for the poll, and then I think it will be 13 was actually one where it's a little clearer once the poll goes up. So you have to scroll down in this poll, and it's multiple choice on each style.
There are 5 questions.
Yeah, there are 5 questions. Here are all the options. And as we go down the poll, we add one option with each time.
And you may be able to make the choices wide enough and tall enough on your screen to read them all at once. That'll depend on your screen.
And if you think the choices aren't the ones you wanted, put what you did want in the chat, because there certainly were different ways we could have phrased this, or we could have put 20 different scenarios down, which wouldn't have been a good idea if we wanted to go eat lunch. But we would like to have your opinion on nonetheless.
Kathleen asks, does the league have a position that supports drop ballots? I think you're meaning drop boxes. Athea?
You can actually check multiple boxes here. This is unexpected to me. You can check for a given question, you can check 2 or I guess 3 out of all of them because they're check boxes, not bullets. We didn't notice that.
But yes, please only vote one way on each of the questions. Otherwise,
Please choose one. Yes.
Yes, we will confuse.
Yes, okay.
And no, the league does not have a specific position on drop boxes. We could, in fact, add a comment about drop boxes along with mail, because that is a somewhat, we're assuming that is part of our mail-in system, but that it's not clear. That would certainly be, you could say, mail-in / drop boxes, and then have the mechanisms of that covered by the chain of custody rules. I think that's a reasonable comment.
Katie, the poll, I don't know if there's a way to resend the poll without losing it, Katie. The,
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, votes are still coming in. We're at 81% participation. This is the last question, Sue. Let's give 20 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Okay. Thank you, Janine. Okay, question 13A. We had 80% of people finding this to be not appropriate. That's only in-person private voting at polling places. The next option was to send ballots to all voters by mail, prohibiting electronic return. 64% found that to be definitely appropriate. To also allow the very limited return of ballots over the internet, restricted only to blind voters and those who would otherwise be disenfranchised. This may be appropriate at 54% and definitely appropriate at 38%. Number 4. This is around the verifiable internet voting. 57% say definitely appropriate, 37% say may be appropriate. And the last option was 100% internet voting. 97% of you say this would be inappropriate.
so I want to make sure that everyone understood that these stacked. so that option number two was both in person and vote by mail. Number three was in person and vote by mail and limited return of ballots. And number four was all of the above plus end-to-end verifiable internet voting. And number five was all of the above plus and everyone can vote over the internet. I wanted to make sure that everyone followed that. So if someone was confused by the question and thinks they now might want to vote differently or would like to add an explanation on their vote in the chat, that would be wonderful. Or if they are willing to send an email to any of us or to info@lwv.colorado.org, that would be great.
And I think it's definitely true that we need to be sure that we refine this in ways that is less confusing by February 7th. Absolutely.
Drive-through voting as we did during COVID-19. I think that's a form of in-person voting, right? Neil?
Yes, indeed.
I would
Okay.
almost say it's a form of a Dropbox. You're just, there's a human.
Or if you're driving
Yeah.
through and handing somebody.
Yeah, I think we could give some thought as to how we phrase things that might be implemented in different states in different ways. I'm not.
So we'll have fun trying to interpret this, I'm sure. My sense is
Wording
that,
suggestions are open.
Yeah. My sense is that, and really my own opinion is that there are some states in which other aspects of the voting process or of the state situation make it appropriate to lobby fiercely against any kind of internet voting. And there are other states where some aspects of what they've already rolled out or how it goes on might get the league to want to lobby for limiting any internet provisions. And so that in some sense, both of those make sense. And my sense for how our current position is worded is that we basically say, if you're going to do anything by internet, then limit it. It doesn't really say you should ever do anything by internet. So I'm wondering if people have thoughts on whether the current position captures this relatively flexible set of responses, or kind of how people are interpreting what we see here. And really appreciate the thought and commentary that's gone into this. We'll keep listening.
Yeah. And I think we need to emphasize accessibility, because if you have a drive-through system and some election official says, well, okay, fine, you can just drive through and go there. That's a huge problem if you're in an area, especially that's not so spread out and where people don't have vehicle access. That doesn't even make sense. And it's certainly a equity issue. So I don't know, we just have to figure out how to balance what is an instruction and what we would be open to in a given state or election entity like a city if they chose to do so. Yes, so I think Marilyn Ayers this time, and what we're trying to do and didn't succeed in a non-confusing fashion was to make these additives so that, yes, you could vote at the polls and you could do by mail and you could do some limited internet perhaps. And of course, that isn't always true and that needs to be more explicit.
So are there enough people who were confused by how the poll was constructed that each question is additive, that number 3 includes everything in 1 and 2, for example, that you'd like us to to rerun that poll? And Beth, I don't know how that would work. Would that work? Can we do that?
Yes, but we would lose the results from the first poll.
Can you screen capture that?
Or can we add a new poll question? Just do a very quick new poll question that kind of says that there were really 4 mutually things that could be mutually exclusive. If we had a question that said, you know, option A, option B, option C, or option E, how many of these would you approve of? Like the multiple choice option.
Yeah, we could do yes, no on, I guess we could do yes, no on each of those individual things.
Yeah.
Making it clear to people that if you vote yes on in-person accessible voting, it doesn't mean that you don't want any of the others. Beth, would that take a long time to do?
I just don't think I can do it while I'm recording. But I'm trying to find out.
Okay.
I think you could save it until February 7th. Work on getting it clear there. Doing it again, I don't think it's going to get you a lot more clarity today.
Okay.
Well, I don't think we're going to do consensus questions on the 7th. I think our goal is to put a draft together and see if we get approval on it. So we want to know how to do the final crafting of the draft.
There was, excuse me, there was a suggestion in the chat that perhaps we could send a revised poll later to people that registered for this event. Is that a possibility, Beth? The whole purpose of today's meeting is just to get input on how we might want to tweak and make the position, excuse me, clearer. And, you know, we could, it doesn't have to necessarily, it would have been nice to have gotten it today, but as long as we could get it, say, by, you know, well, we'd have to have everything by the 30th of January, but preferably by the 1st of the next week. Can we do that, Beth? Is that easy enough to do?
Sure, we could send out a survey through Club Express.
Okay, we can come up with a much more clearly worded question, and then that way we can get input so that we are in a position to be able to make the necessary edits to the.
Yeah. So the important thing now is edits to the position statement, and that on February 7th, we ask people questions that makes sense to them and aren't confusing when we ask for an actual vote. This isn't an actual vote.
So yes, we will. Thank you, Beth. We will do a survey. Beth will get that to you, that info to you. If the team could stay on for a few minutes afterwards, that would be great. And we are sorry for confusing you. We are very grateful to everyone who stayed and who gave opinions. I don't know of any, does anyone know of any local leagues that are planning to have their own consensus meetings?
If you know of a local league, if you could just contact Beth and let her know so that we're simply aware of it, that would be helpful. Otherwise, the responses are due January the 30th. Any responses to our written follow-up poll question would be due. If you could get them to us before January the 30th, that would really.
We'll need them. We'll need them by then.
I am going to make an assumption here, and if there is anybody who is stringently opposed, speak up, that based on the feedback that we have gotten in the poll responses, that membership is strongly in favor of us coming up with a final edit for an election security position that we will then vote on February the 7th in final form to submit to LWVUS. Is there anybody that says, we don't want to do that?
I'm glad to have seen 100% for almost everything we talked about. And maybe I would refine that question a little bit to say, again, my read of the opinions on 13 is that some flexibility, that there is consensus for a little bit of flexibility, that if we're going to do any internet voting, we really want it to be as secured as possible, and we really do want to limit it. But the question of whether to allow any internet voting, even limited at all, might depend. Are there people who would disagree, who would say the league absolutely must take, a completely strong position, let's say, against any form of internet voting? Or do most people think that there are maybe some circumstances?
Neil, I think we're going to get that in the follow-up poll also. So, yeah.
We will also be very interested in any specific wording suggestions you have that would express your sense of the consensus.
I think the league's position. I think the league's position is always that we want to make sure that everybody can vote. I joke that for many members of a certain party that I won't mention by name, the worst thing that could happen is that anybody vote illegally. And from the league's point of view, the worst thing that could happen is that anybody who's legally allowed to vote is denied the right to vote. And so I think there may be people who can only vote by internet. We need to make sure they can do that.
I think that's a great point. It's a trade-off.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Frank.
And I would respond as somebody was asking about representatives of the disability communities and how they felt about this. We have not discussed that yet with people regarding this position statement, but both Karen Sheik and I and other league members have talked with representatives. That was back last year for me, having to do with the legislation that was then before the state legislature. And so, yes, we are interested in their input.
So Christina asks, can we build a statement that if improved procedures are developed in the future, would we consider internet voting for a broader population? Neil, I think that's so far that there are so many vendors who say, oh yeah, my stuff is perfectly safe, that day is so far into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way to handle that is to say, if there is a point in the future where it's worth asking the membership again to take a position, that we should do that. My sense is that, these problems are not, people have devoted their lives trying to make that possible, and they're not succeeding. And so, the notion it is not just a little bit ahead of us. And if a breakthrough comes, then it would absolutely make sense to revisit the question. That's kind of how I don't think we should have an open-ended, who knows who would actually decide in the future if it was good enough.
All right. At this point, if there are no further questions, Maude, I think we have do we have a final slide with contact information?
We do. Thank you for reminding me, Karen.
And actually, if you can get up there to the chat at the very top, we also did put this information at the very beginning of the chat. And if you want to take a quick minute to go up and copy, then you can paste it so that you have it.
And also, Laura is at the state office is fabulous about monitoring the info at lwvcolorado.org, the main email address, and she will forward things to us. So somebody is having another conversation that makes it hard for the rest
Yeah,
of us to
please
hear.
mute, please mute.
So
if you can.
please mute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And then I was going to point out that we don't actually say, well, like in our draft position 6, where we talk about software independence, and that we want to be able to do audits to ensure accurate votes are possible, for example, by using verifiable paper ballots, which can be recounted. So if you really had a system that you wanted to bring to the League of Women Voters' attention that indeed did offer that kind of voter verifiability, and that you had accurate tracing, that is, we're not actually ruling it out, but we're not putting technological specifications in this as to exactly what criteria would need to be met. That would depend something about technology we don't know about yet.
And I'll also note that, you know, the US is not the only country in the world. Switzerland and Estonia and Ontario are struggling with these questions in different ways. Pay attention to them. Those of us in the field are trying to do that. So it's tricky.
All right, Jane has asked what we need by January the 30th. If you have additional comments, if your local league is planning on having a consensus meeting, please do notify Beth, just so that we know. That way we can kind of follow up if we need to. But any input that you all would like to make, we have to have by January the 30th. The sooner we get it, the better, because I don't think we want to wait until January the 30th to start looking at necessary edits. So as soon as you can get input to us, that would be appreciated, but then that's the drop dead deadline. If we don't get it by then, it won't be considered. Mark your calendars, please, for February the 7th at 6:30. That is a Monday night. And we will look forward to meeting with you at that time. We will send out, if we can, as far enough, we will try to send out as far ahead of time as we possibly might be able to, the final draft for you to look at. And then that February 7th meeting will be a vote. So
and we will send a survey out on 13 that we hope will be much clearer.
yes. Well, thank you again for your time, especially for the 41 of you that hung on until the bitter end. If the committee would still stay on, please Zoom, as everybody else signs off, that would be appreciated.
And I think our captioner, Beth, are we done with captioning?
Yes, we are.
Thank you, captioner. We appreciate it.
Okay. Tony, do you, what happened? I don't think, how does a closed captioner work? Do they just leave, or do we need to have them stay on, Beth?
I don't think we do.
I'll tell you, that was very slick today. That's a really, really nice feature, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good job, folks.
Yeah, except for 13.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
I don't think it's so bad. I do think that the whole process went very, very well. And just because some people were confused with 13 doesn't mean that, that's necessarily bad. It was just the way it is.
well, I think the fact that we have the opportunity to be able to go back and look at the wording and make it clear, maybe make it a little bit clearer and get it out again, so that if people are interested in providing input, they can. I suspect that probably the way we would like to have seen their responses is how they will respond when it's clearer to them what's being asked. I have to say, guys, I am very proud of how this went today.
Yeah, and I don't know that 13 is that confusing. I mean, it's very clear people don't want internet voting for all.
Right?
It's very clear that, I think a couple people acknowledged that they thought 1 was a little confusing, but 80% were pretty clear. So I would say that there's consensus not to choose option 1 to allow mail-in voting. And on the other 2, there's, people like the idea of not allowing electronic return, but a number of people, in fact, a very clear majority, think it's either maybe appropriate or definitely appropriate. And so that's kind of, I think what that says is that we recognize in number 4 that, asking for the very best security for any internet return is important, and that we try to leave it up a little bit to the discretion of the states whether or not they push for internet voting. I don't know the right language to frame that, but it's not clear to me that we're going to learn anything different in a different poll.
I agree. And I think that probably everything except 13 doesn't need to be reviewed again.
Oh yeah, none of the others.
Yeah, the other point I would make is, and it's a rule of thumb that that we used to go with. I'm not sure it's still operative. Depends upon how comfortable you all are. But we talk about consensus being something in the realm of 80%. So it doesn't have to be the whole number of people.
Okay, see, that is something I always wanted to know.
Yeah.
Well, it may be that folklore that I carry around, but you can go with it if you want to.
Well, the truth is, you're never, I'm sorry, unless you are only working with people who see eye to eye on every single little thing, you're never going to get 100% agreement on everything. So,
and I think we have over 90% agreement for both 2 and 3 that it either may be or is definitely appropriate to allow kind of either of them. And I think there was only 80% clarity on poll number 1, but I think we understand why. So I don't know. I think we have our answer.
Well,
not that we shouldn't
Well, we
reach out.
told them we
although
were going to do it again, so we need to do it again.
yes.
The question is how, Beth, do you know what sort of character limit, because we ran into the character limit on Zoom is why we couldn't be more clear in the Zoom poll. Do you know if there's a character limit on the Club Express polling?
I
survey?
don't, but I don't think there is.
Can you find some long document and paste it in sometime in the pretty near future so that we could find out, because I think what would be more clear would be to have the same structure, but have the text for one be as it was, and the text for two be everything in one plus the text for two.
Maud, let's make the format completely different.
Okay.
It was confusing. I'm wondering if maybe we did something to the effect that, you know, it's important to me that, you know, in-person polling be available, that drop boxes be available, that, you know, all mail-in ballots be available, that internet, so that people can make a choice of those things that they think are important, and include that limited internet access for only those that need it, or absolutely no internet voting. And then that way we can get a sense of, you know, where people, I don't think that most people are going to be, that we're going to be surprised by the
Right.
The response.
I think it'd be great to add the Dropbox, because I think
yeah.
that's very responsible of us to.
Well,
Um,
that's what we do in our state. I mean, we are developing a position that's been based on things that have been, that voters in Colorado have liked, have used, and we want to put it out there. I think too, it's real important that everybody understand that, although I agree with you 100%, Neil, that returning your ballot is not a safe way to do it, and it should be extremely limited or not at all. But the truth is, it's a balance between what our mission is. And Frank said it very eloquently, that, you know, we don't, our job is to make sure that people who are citizens and have the right to vote, that they get the vote. And so it may be a trade-off in some cases. And then we deal with, you know, we put in as many measures as we can to make it as safe as possible until we can come up with a way that makes it even safer. So it's a trade-off.
Yeah, I think I would actually, I mean, again, I think we have a pretty clear sense of this way of asking the question.
Yeah.
I think it's obvious that, I mean, what we should do with the Dropbox thing is come up with proposed change to the position and kind of just vet it by sending it out. But what I think we ought to do with this limited internet voting question is to ask it in a completely different way. Something like, it looks to me like we do not have consensus for either of those choices in all cases. So I would put out some, you know, put again our position recommendation out, and I think our current one is actually not bad. It basically says, if you're going to do this, then limit it, but it doesn't say do it. And maybe to explicitly say there might be state circumstances in which you do one or the other. You know, like try to craft language to make it clear to state leaders that maybe they do get a local choice as to whether to completely vote against it or say it's okay if it's limited.
Well, and you have to realize that you want this to be acceptable, have the potential of being acceptable in as many states as possible. And if we wind up getting terrific feedback from some communities that can't get on board at all, and so it becomes a deal killer, then we've shot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we want the answers still to be the way they were on 13?
I think we need to
Acceptable.
ask a different set of questions.
Well, not the questions, the answers. Do we want the responses to be definitely acceptable, maybe, or definitely not?
Again, I'm thinking of something that isn't putting 5 questions out there. We've got answers for the 5 questions. That's pretty understandable. I think it's something like, should we allow state flexibility around this choice, depending on local conditions.
I think we told people we were going to rerun 13, so I think we need to rerun 13. Karen?
No, I think they just want a sense of being able to express how they feel about this. I don't think we have to rerun 13.
I think we
I think they
need,
didn't like 13, that was definite, but I don't think that means they want to see some gussied up form of it.
Karen?
no, Gathia, I think they didn't understand 13. I think that it wasn't a question of liking or disliking. I think the question was worded with the responses offered in the poll in such a way that it was confusing.
Yeah.
And I think if we give them the option to be able to share what they think needs to be included, what could possibly be included, what should absolutely not be included, we may get a better sense of where people stand. It was just confusing, and part of it may have been because of our technology constrictures with how much could appear. But I think it was how the question was presented, not. So we need to come up with a different way to do that.
So, and Beth, do you have comments?
Not really. I think you guys are covering it real well here.
Okay, so what
Let me just say that what I think we need, if we want to rerun 13, okay, in some form, but what I think we need is how to get clarity on the position. And I'm going to have to jump off to get to something else, but I suggest that we each take some shot at what we're going to need to change, and that we make sure that when we go to the membership, we get what we need to make a crisp position. And I think that's a different thing than kind of these consensus questions. And that's why I'm trying to frame it in terms of, should the position say there's flexibility, or should the position say the league does this? And I think if we say that it has to be this way or that way, allow internet voting limited or disallow it, if we make that either of those choices, I think we will not get consensus either at the state or the national level. So that's why I think we need wording to think about and then present to them before we finalize it on how to say this is an area where it depends.
Todd, could you send that out to everybody, and then maybe we can all look at it and just come up with our own suggestions for.
I will draft something. And I think what I'm hearing is an introductory thing that says, here are 5 different components or 6 different components that can be part of an election system. Which ones do you think should be included? And then each one is yes or no.
Yes.
So Maud, if we get that answer, and if they say, and if we get a split answer, half the people think it should be this way or the highway, half the people think it should be that way or the highway, where do we go with that?
We don't have consensus. If it's 50-50, we don't have consensus.
So we say nothing at all about internet voting, or what?
No, I mean, I think we're going to get, we don't want everyone voting over the internet.
Yeah.
And I think and it's the middle ground of, do we want limited, that may be split, and maybe we can't say anything about limited. Maybe we just say we do not want widespread voting over the internet.
And not necessarily make each one a yes or no, just make a whole list of things that you can check off. We think we should include in-person voting. We think we should include mail-in ballots. We think we should include drop boxes. And then you have the list and people can check off those things that they think.
I'm sorry, but if we get a bunch of, like, I think the perfect system is this, it's this combination of require that, don't allow that, then we're getting way further from any possibility of a consensus. I think we need to figure out what we think we can get consensus on, pitch that to them, and say, do you agree that we could get consensus on this position language? And if we get an 80% or more for a particular paragraph of position language, then we think we'll get a yes vote on the 7th. If we can't come up with a paragraph that we think we're going to get consensus on, then we're just going to learn that the opinion is split, and we're not going to have a way to go forward.
Right. Right. And I think that also frames it in a way that people can think, which I think, I have serious reservations that we ought to have online voting by people with visual disabilities, because I think all you have to do to control that block of voter is to hack the National Federation for the Blind, the software that they use on their personal computers and so on, and it's entirely doable. On the other hand, we want people to vote. We want them to feel like they are part of the process in a way that is analogous to everybody else, and that they can vote independently and securely and privately. And so, okay, we'll do it. But if you ask me a question, do I think they should do it? My answer is actually no. So I think that we want to say what we want to present this, that we want, here's the position statement that we would like for the state of Colorado and for the national convention. And what do they think makes an acceptable position for the league to support?
Yeah.
I think once Maud sends out the information, everybody has a chance to look at it, and then you jot down what you think might work, then it may be easier to be able to come up with something. Sometimes it's kind of hard to talk about how you think it ought to look if you can't see it, or at least it is for me. And I agree with everything you're saying, Neil. I agree with what you say, Gathia. It's, let's see what it looks like in writing, and then figure out how we can tweak it before it gets sent out, so that hopefully we've presented something that is clearer to, because obviously if you looked at that last string of comments in the chat, again and again, it's confusing. So let's just figure out how to make it less confusing and send it out again. I don't think that folks necessarily disagree. I just think that they didn't understand how they needed to vote in order to express what they thought needed to be included.
So Beth, I will include you in this. If you could still check a text limit on Club Express, that would be fabulous. I know we're eating into your Saturday. And then I will include you in the draft so that you can comment on it, but obviously we'll all be weighing in before we ask Rob to send something out. When do we want to reconvene, gang? Because we may need to do this as a meeting. Do we want to meet tomorrow afternoon? Want is the wrong word. Are we able to meet tomorrow afternoon?
I'm sorry, I cannot.
No.
No, Beth, we're not asking you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You've been wonderful, Beth. Thank
Yes,
you.
Beth, thank you.
I can
And-
do evening.
You can certainly come if you want to, but we're not.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
asking you.
And Tony, we love all the input we just cherish all the input that you give us, because it's always valuable. But we understand that you have like 3 other lives, so.
But it doesn't always pertain to exactly what you're talking about. I go tangential every once in a while. I'm free tomorrow. What other choices do you want?
Can we go, Karen?
I am free tomorrow as long as we do it earlier in the day, because we had made arrangements for people to come for dinner, and so.
Okay. How early?
Well, it would be